Thank you all for joining us again this afternoon for Session 7. As far as we are aware, we believe that we have resolved our technology issues. It involved using a hard cable instead of the Wi-Fi and having IT come down and do some upgrades both to the cable as well as to the laptop. But we did test this earlier in the week and we had a really successful conversation that included both audio and video, and so we're going to put that to the test today. And we are going to, in about halfway through today's sessions, we are going to open both your audio and your video today to really see if we've really fixed the problem. I do want to give you apologies from Sue and Dale and Helen. Instead of 6 today, we are 3 today. And again, just some general housekeeping bits today. Generally, we'll have you turn your webcam and microphone off, but we'll tell you when to turn them on, when we're going to be using those. If you need to contact us at any time, just type an asterisk into the chat box. And unlike recent sessions, we will be recording today's session and it will be available to view afterwards. So I apologize to any of you who are relying on those recordings to kind of keep up with the session. We did always post the short content video from the session because that, of course, is something that we record separate to the actual online course. Today we are going to try to use only GoToMeeting, so you will not need your second devices today, and that's primarily because we're such a small group. Instead of having you divide up or to connect using a second device, it actually makes more sense for us to try to let you connect using this the GoToMeeting platform. And again, we'll give you directions about how to do that when we come to that part of today's session. Today we have Wendy and Carmen and Mary, and again, thank you to each of you for joining us today. This is session 7. There are 2 more sessions after today, and I will just kind of say, even before we begin today's sessions, that the last 3 sessions generally will not be 90 minutes long. They're a little bit shorter, and the reason for that is not that we're covering less content, but because as we go through the course, the content becomes more conceptual in that you don't really have a way to use the information immediately because you don't have a data set and you're not actually conducting an actual project. We are not going to spend as much time in discussion around it. Again, I'm relying on you to have done some of the reading and to do the exercise, which is gives you a little bit of practice with the concepts that we're going to be covering. But again, as always, we will stay in line for as long as you have questions or you want to discuss different things that we've been covering. So before we begin today, do any of you have any questions, especially any of you who may have missed some of the other sessions, even if you were here and missed them, because in fact they didn't actually happen. So do you have any questions from last week's session, which we had to abandon rather abruptly, or anything else? Again, just type an asterisk into the box if you have any questions at this point. Okay, I don't see any questions right now, so we'll go right into session 7. And in session 7, we're beginning to think about the kind of final preparations that you need to make before you actually begin your data collection. And we're going to be talking today about different forms of validity. And to introduce the content, as in all the previous sessions, we have a short video, and we're going to share the video with you now.
Hello, and welcome to Session 7 of Getting Started with Action Research. In earlier sessions, we discussed the importance of reviewing the published academic literature, writing an annotated bibliography, identifying intervention, and developing a data collection plan. In this session, we are returning to a fundamental challenge of the action research process raised in Session 1, maintaining objectivity in your dual role as researcher and research participant. To optimize the validity of your action research, you will need to identify key points in the research process when you will pause to collect and consider purposeful and formal self-reflection, peer feedback, and participant feedback. To get started, let's review some basic data terms. Let's begin with validity. In Session 6, we define data validity as the extent to which an assessment measures what it claims to measure. This is called test validity. However, in educational research, validity has other important meanings. Validity can also refer to the degree to which research results are relevant to the participants involved in the study. This is called internal validity. Optimizing test validity and internal validity are both essential for formal action research. For some action research studies, the results may also be potentially relevant to other individuals with similar characteristics outside the study. This is called external validity. Remember that the point of action research is to produce practical knowledge, knowledge that benefits the practitioner and the other participants. But in some situations, the results of an action research study may be relevant to individuals, teachers, or students outside the study. If generalizable knowledge is anticipated or desired, careful attention must be given to optimizing external validity. To improve the trustworthiness of action research results, researchers should consider key questions that will help identify the dimensions of validity that are most relevant to their work. To get started, let's consider 6 questions you should ask to optimize internal validity. Question 1. Which stakeholders should be collaborators in the study, and how will they be involved? To demonstrate that you have optimized democratic validity, you will need to think about the evidence you will collect that demonstrates that stakeholders had a voice in the research process. You may do this by using a survey or structured interview questions during planned research collaborator consultations or participant check-ins. Question 2. How do I know the results reflect what actually happened and do not reflect my personal interests, biases, or preconceived notions about the outcomes? To demonstrate that you have optimized neutrality, you will need to consider the evidence you collect to demonstrate that you are aware of and have taken steps to address your personal interests, biases, or preconceptions. You may do this by using a survey or structured interview questions during planned collaborator consultations or participant check-ins, or by improving test validity through methods of data triangulation and data accuracy discussed in Session 6. You may also find that it is useful to record your personal interests, biases, or preconceptions in a research log, and to periodically revisit and reflect on these. Question 3. What do I need to do to understand the ways context and process have influenced the outcome? To demonstrate that you have optimized process validity, you will need to consider the accuracy of your understanding of the context and the accuracy of the findings, interpretations, and conclusions for the context. Again, you may do this by using a survey or structured interview questions during planned collaborator consultations or participant check-ins, or by improving test validity through methods of data triangulation and data accuracy discussed in Session 6. You may also find that it is useful to record your personal interests, biases, or preconceptions in a research log, and to periodically revisit and reflect on these. Question 4. How will I use the results for ongoing reflection and deepening my personal learning? To demonstrate that you are optimizing outcome validity, you will need to consider the ability of the study to increase your understanding of the problem and how it can best be resolved. You may do this by presenting your findings for critical review, or consulting with peers, or by reviewing your research log. Question 5. In what ways will the processes I use and the outcomes I achieve change my practice? To demonstrate that you are optimizing catalytic validity, you will need to consider the potential of your action research study to inform or transform your practice. The most commonly used method for doing this is reviewing the regularly coded entries in your research log. Question 6. Do I need a critical friend to discuss my study and results? This question is especially important if you are working on your own. To demonstrate that you are optimizing dialogic validity, you will need to share process progress and research findings, and seek feedback about your interpretations and conclusions. You may do this by presenting your findings for critical review, by consulting with peers, or by using survey or structured interview questions during planned participant check-ins. Now, let's consider 2 additional questions you should ask to optimize external validity if that is relevant to your action research study. The first question is, how might the results be used beyond my classroom? To optimize possible transferability, you will need to understand the appropriateness of the intervention in other settings. You can develop this understanding by making detailed notes about your own setting and routinely making notes in your research log about how you think the setting is influencing or is being influenced by the intervention. The second question is, would I get the same results with other similar students? Those students may be in a similar class being taught by another teacher, or they may be your new cohort of students next year. To optimize consistency, you will need to understand the likelihood that your intervention will produce similar results in other settings or with new cohorts of your own students. As with the previous question, you can develop this understanding by making detailed notes about your own setting and routinely making notes in your research log about how you think the setting is influencing or being influenced by the intervention. Understanding which dimensions of validity are relevant to your action research question, the best times to address them, and the most effective strategies for collecting the evidence you need is a skill that you will develop with experience. Recognizing the important role that validity plays both in data quality and the research process is fundamental to creating a research plan. In session 8, we'll talk about data analysis and presentation. Thank you for your interest in action research.
All right, before we go on to the small group discussion, I was wondering if anyone had any questions about anything that was covered in that content video. And you probably recognize that that video is kind of a verbal description of the table that appeared in the materials that we sent out in advance of this session. If you have any questions or you want to make comments, again, if you could type an asterisk into the box and we will open your microphone. Okay, we're going to go on to the group discussion, which would be a group discussion rather than paired discussion. And all three of you are going to be taking part in that discussion. So if you want to take out your Learning Log 7.1 and refer to this, if you have completed it, if you've thought about it, still pull it out because this is going to be the basis for your small group discussion. There are three questions that I want you to think about and talk about. The first is, what types of validity are applicable to my study? What are the strategies I'll use to increase this type of validity? And when will I employ these strategies? And again, one of the reasons why there are so many different aspects of validity that are considered in an action research project is to help address that dilemma of the fact that unlike other kinds of research, you are both a researcher and a participant. And so in an effort to maintain neutrality and to be as objective as you possibly can in your decision making and in your in the way that you conduct your research, these validity questions are really important. So what we're going to ask you to do now is to turn on both your video and your microphone. So instead of going offline, you guys are now going to take over the GoToMeeting, and we're going to turn off our microphone and just kind of turn the platform over to you. So again, please turn on your video and turn on your microphone. Yep, so Carmen has both, and the video should come up in just a moment for everyone. We will stop sharing the screen.
Just for 5 minutes.
Hi, everybody. So everyone can see one another?
Yeah.
And we can hear everybody. We're going to turn off our video or our audio in just a moment and just kind of turn the platform over to you. If you do get any feedback, what I need you to do is just check and make sure that you don't have another open device nearby, so like an iPad or an iPhone. And that's, again, only if you begin to hear feedback, because sometimes that has an effect on the audio. So we're going to give you 20 minutes. Go ahead and use this platform instead of going offline, and we will let you know when there are 10 minutes left and then when there are 2 minutes left. Okay, go ahead, guys.
Hello. I'll start if you if you don't want to start. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think I need to go back to the question before I move on to the validity, because I think it's necessary to know the question. Sorry, I'm trying to find the question. I cannot find it. Oh, sorry.
It's on the third screen.
I'm just, yeah. Was anyway, my thing was about the 8th grade boys, which I have problems with. They are not behaving appropriately, especially when they don't like the unit in PE. We don't have problems in basketball or in football or units that they like, but if it comes to dance, gymnastics, or other stuff that they're not so fond of, they're not behaving appropriately. And the validity types that I think I'm using, I mean, I looked at all of them and I read through them. I think they're all important, and I use them, you know, I use them a lot, or I use part of them as well. But the democratic one, I think I use it when I formulate the question, because as it says there, you need to know, you know, who are you collaborating with, who are the stakeholders, and so I think that's in the question, and you use that when you plan the question, when you write the question. Neutrality, probably when I do the baseline data and formative assessment. I think, I mean, the strategies, they're all peer consultation, definitely. That's coming into it, and for the democratic one is the participant check-in, and for the baseline data and the formative assessment. For the process, I think I'm using that validity when I did I don't know, maybe I got it wrong, but when I did a literature research and the formative and informative assessment, again, participant check-in, triangulation, and using the research log. The outcomes in the catalytic validity, probably I'll use them when I, especially the outcome, when I reflect back on what I've done and how things are going, and if I want to change anything in the process. The peer consultation and the research log are the main tools for that. The catalytic and dialogic validities, probably at the end of the research, talking to my peers and having a consultation, presenting the results, and using the research log. As in PE, we are 4 teachers, and all 4 of us teach 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Again, I think the transferability and consistency applies to us, because we all have the same type of problems, and we try to sort it out. So.
Okay, good.
I don't know if anything made sense, but.
Yeah, I think all of them are in use regardless of what kind of study that you do, but some of them are going to take a lot more emphasis than others. For example, the baseline data and emphasizing neutrality, if carefully organized, shouldn't really need to be done more than once.
Yeah.
Because you would design the actual setup so that it's always going to be relevant to what you consider neutral. And in the case from my question, I think the best way to provide that neutrality is to always refer data back to original answers from students, or original answers from collaborators, so that you can use quotations and you can use scoring systems if they're designed that way to show your neutrality, so that you're only ever commenting on what's directly available from your participants. I think overall, the question that I've been working on, as Carmen will be aware of, maybe Wendy not so much, is looking at using Excel and other visual learning tools to help develop math skills in the science classroom. And so I'll be using various different types of tutorials and worksheets and data analysis ideas to help students see how they can transfer their math skills through the sciences. So each of the validities is important. The democratic one, in terms of initially assessing from staff and students what their needs for these tools are, so that I can gauge how transferable the tool might be to other classrooms and to other subjects, and students' reasons for preferences or difficulties that they might be having. The neutrality I've mentioned. Process validity, I think the most usual one of those that I would use would be the data triangulation. So trying out different pathways to achieve the same type of data outcome and see that it's consistent across each option. I can support this with reflections as suggested, but most of it is going to be looking at the same idea in different ways. And then feeding back to staff in a type of peer coaching aspect to help look at how it's going from an objective perspective and from the critical friend idea. So I think the how things relate to professionalism and dialogue validity is a similar idea in my case. The catalytic validity, I think it will, I'm hoping, I'm not sure yet, but I'm hoping that the results of the study will help the school overall become more informed about how to find students' ability levels throughout their learning in grade 9 to help direct them towards their subject choices later. If they're able to integrate their math well, it can make all the difference between grades in sciences. And so if we are able to assess their math ability within a science context, we may be able to predict their abilities later on, or their strengths at least later on. So I think that's probably the furthest reaching of measuring some kind of catalytic validity. That also applies to how appropriate using tools in Excel might be for other subjects, such as economics, or analyzing group results in a psychology study, for example, or a research activity in another subject. And getting the same consistency with another group, I'm not quite sure about that one. That's something I think I would need to look into a bit more, because each group is going to be an individual group involving obviously up to 20 individuals. So optimizing consistency for a study, I'm not really sure how to design that just yet. That's something I'm still looking into.
That sounds brilliant. Now, I really like the way that it's able to work across the different subject areas. I think it has huge potential, and that's something we should be replicating here as well. So it'd be interesting to find out.
Hopefully it will be successful. I would like for it to be as collaborative as possible. So this is a good way to get started and overview it. Thank you.
So the age group I'm working with, I found it a bit difficult to get the participants' angle because they're only 4 and 5. So I've kind of excluded that, but having listened to you, I'm wondering now if there is a way of being able to get their point of view in a more age-appropriate way. So I'm reflecting as we're going along. The first type of validity was the neutrality, and the biggest part for me is the peer consultation, and I'm hoping to do this through identifying the critical, and I'm expanding it to friends rather than just friend, and definitely Sue and Helen at Hillingdon will hopefully help me with that. And I see that as checking out various stages of the research, so not just at the end. And with the triangulation and the recording of the data, looking at using video to record the observations during the action research. The next type was the process, and again using the peer consultation, the triangulation, the research log, and obviously the bias identification, again with the critical friends and the videoing. And then with the dialogic, definitely looking at the presentation of the results through the peer consultation, and then seeing that at the different stages of the research. And then for me, quite a big one is the transferability, not only within similar settings to the early childhood classroom, but I'm looking at the beginning of the research, looking at how other schools have been using the app that I'm looking at researching within the UK, but looking at the potential of working with our sister school in Namibia. So this is transferring it to a completely different context, so to see if the results would work in a completely different setting. So it's yeah, looking to see how that would work through the research log, and looking carefully at the setting and the study. But, yeah, those are the types that I've explored.
Sounds good.
How are we doing for time?
I've probably about 5 or 6 minutes, but
10 minutes.
yeah, it's been 10 minutes there for a while, so.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I have to say that I think that you were all so well prepared that you actually did that in a really short amount of time. And I do have to admit, even though our microphone was off, I have been listening in on the conversation. And I think that the things that you have been talking about really, at this point, kind of show a very kind of high level of thinking about how you would address or improve these different levels of validity within your action research projects. I do want to say that one of the reasons why I have included this content in the course, this is the first time I've actually included these validity discussions in the course. But the reason that I felt that it was so important is that in past years, we've kind of gotten to session 9 or session 10, and people are still asking questions about how you really maintain objectivity in the action research process, or how you ensure that throughout the process that you have kind of placed yourself in a position of neutrality as effectively as you can. Again, faced with this dilemma of being both the researcher and a participant. And so this section was really meant to give you kind of a richer vocabulary for thinking about kind of the fine detail of validity. And again, I want to thank you all for the observations that you made about your own thinking about your projects, because I think that you all have really demonstrated that, with each of your research questions, there are these really great opportunities to improve validity. And validity is essential, not just because it really represents a more rigorous approach to structured professional growth, but it really is essential to the research process. And if you're thinking about sharing your findings or results from your particular piece of action research with other people, by employing all these different validity strategies, you can do that with a much higher level of confidence in the results that you have that you've created. Probably some of you would have had experience of these different kinds of validity processes if you've done any kind of moderated activities in your classroom. If you've moderated an assessment or you've moderated a unit of instruction, you will have engaged in exercises that are aimed at increasing the external validity. But I did want to mention, because a couple of you really struggled with the role that external validity would play. Generally, in an action research project, your main concern is not external validity, because remember, the practical knowledge that you're building is intended to inform your own practice with the group of unique learners who you're working with at that point in time. And so generally, action research is not trying to produce generalizable knowledge that meets all the external validity criteria. But I want to thank Wendy, because one of the best ways, if you really thought that you wanted to do a piece of action research and you were trying to improve the external validity, one of the first things that you would do is that you would look for another teacher in another classroom to be a co-researcher with you. And what I mean by that is that you would both essentially be asking the same action research question, but investigating it with the groups of students who you have in your class. So Wendy's example is a rather extreme one. A teacher here in the UK and a teacher in a school in Namibia. You might also consider, a teacher at your campus or a teacher from one of the other ACS campuses who teaches a similar grade or a similar subject. That type of action research actually has a label. It's called second person action research. And in this course, we haven't really spent a lot of time looking at the different forms of action research. What we've been talking about primarily is first person action research, which is research that you lead in your own classroom. But whenever you work in collaboration with someone else, whether you're asking the same question and investigating it in two classrooms, or whether you're asking slightly different questions that are related and investigating them in two different places, that's typically called second-person action research. And again, when you begin engaging in second-person action research, those questions about external validity are much easier to think about and to address. So again, I want to thank you for that for your really, really rich discussion and for preparing for this session so well. Did any of you want to add anything else? And again, if you could, you don't need to use asterisks since we're all online. You can just go ahead and speak.
Personally, I don't have any. I cannot think of anything to add. I think it's a very complex process, and as I said, from my point of view, involves all the validity types and lots of the strategies, especially the peer consultation and the participant check-in.
Yeah. Thanks, Carmen. The other thing that I should say is that it was great that most of you really thought about how each of these forms of validity could be relevant to your particular piece of action research. But I will tell you that in reality, because, again, as the participant and as the researcher and, your real full-time job is the teaching part, that you often don't have time or space to address all of these different types of validity. And so in those situations, and that's perfectly an acceptable thing to do, what you want to do is you want to actually identify those aspects of validity that are most important to your particular question. And so, for example, as Wendy said, because she works with such small children, that perhaps the democratic validity piece isn't going to be as easy to achieve because they don't have the language or the vocabulary or the experience perhaps to articulate some of the same ideas that you would get from 8th graders if you were involving them in naming the problem and thinking about the process. So you should always think about all these different types of validity, but you should choose the forms of validity that are most important or most relevant or most appropriate to the research question that you have. So Carmen, thank you for that. Mary or Wendy, do you have anything else?
I was wondering about the idea of optimizing consistency, actually, Ben. I'm not sure how that can be done when you're going to translate a study from one group of students to another. I can see how it can be done in terms of organizing the intervention and making sure that that's consistent. But I don't know that I would always get the same results with another group of students. I think it's very much dependent on previous experience and learning needs. And if I was to use a designated set of tools as a research study now, it may be different with another group.
Yeah, Mary, no, I think that's exactly right. And you have both the intervention and you have the students and you also have the physical setting. And oftentimes we may underestimate how important the physical setting is. And when I mean physical setting, I mean literally, how big is the space? Mm-hmm. What is the seating arrangement? How many students are there? Sometimes even in our regular teaching and in an action research process, midway through your process, you may have a day when there are 4 children who are absent, so you have really a dramatically different number of students given our class sizes. And then even figuring out if, on that particular day, if the outcome, better or worse, was influenced by, an unexpected number of absences, you may find it even difficult to think about consistency within your own practice. So it's a really challenging piece. I think that the point of a lot of these validity questions is not that you solve them, but that you recognize them and address them and record the fact that they were things that kind of issues that came up in the research process. So you're not necessarily trying to eliminate them, but you always want to recognize when they may have influenced any stage of the process.
Sorry, can I just say that I think that the reflection it's coming into that, because once you sorted out the process and you've done it with a group of students, then you have to reflect to the next group of students to see what's applying to them and what's not, and from there on, maybe change bits and pieces from your questions and from your research, and not everything has to be different. Maybe the best part of it applies to everyone, but will be little bits and pieces that won't apply, and that's where the reflection comes in, and trying to adapt it again, your question and your research.
Sure.
No, thank you. That's absolutely correct. I agree with you 100%. Wendy, did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. All right. So I said that this was going to be a rather short session today, and that's in part because even though there was a second learning log, which was simply just kind of a template for setting up an action research process, we put this in as an optional piece. And so if you actually find that you do carry out this piece of action research that you've been kind of basing your class participation on, this is the same template that we use with our SIM project. So this is the template that we sit down with all of our project leaders. And this is a starting point. I mean, I say it's a template. Some of our projects end up being far more complex, and some of them are much simpler than this. And this is a paper version. Some of you may have used electronic Gantt charts or other pieces of software for creating timelines. There's no one way to create a timeline, but the point of including this as a learning log is that because action research is a structured process, it always has a timeline to kind of guide the process and to, so that you can plan when you're going to collect data, when you're going to do these different validity checks, when you're going to analyze data, when the project begins and when it ends, because that's, again, always very, very important. So again, this is just offered as a tool that you may or may not have used at this point, but that you might use at some time in the future. As with all the sessions, we also included kind of a learning points log that some of you may or may not be using to record the points for each session. Kind of in closing, because this was a short session today, we will send a recording of this session out to everyone tomorrow, including our 3 colleagues who weren't able to join us today. We will be sending you the materials for session 8. Session 8 is going to focus on qualitative data coding. And again, this is something that some of our participants in the course have had experience with in the past. For some people, it's really a new area. Data analysis is a huge area. There are, multiple courses in universities on data analysis. We're not going to look at data analysis comprehensively because, of course, the data analysis methods that you use will depend on your research question and on the data that you collect along the way. We are, as I said, they're going to focus on qualitative data analysis because it's probably something that everyone will do as part of their action research process, even if it's a small part of the process. So the materials I'm going to send you have a coding exercise, and we will look at that coding exercise next week as part of the course. Because I have you all online and because things seem to be working, can I just ask for feedback about how the software is working for you today?
It's great. It's very good.
Okay.
No
All right,
problems
guys.
at all today.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next week for session 8.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.